Hello, everyone. We're at the last couple weeks. This whole week, we're just going to be spending some time just catching up on any questions that people might have, like maybe previous programming assignments. People might have some debugging issues. And yeah, we could go over that stuff, but I wanted to start off with just some final announcements, right? So we're just going to make some final announcements about the dates for the exam, and then we're going to end super early and have a bunch of free time for folks to catch up on anything. So yeah, let's do that first. The exam is scheduled for next week. It's a different schedule, by the way. Finals week is a different schedule at Cabrillo, meaning that the allocated time is going to be an earlier time. Let me just pull up the time. Our scheduled time for the final is actually on a Friday. It's on a Friday from 1 to 3:50 p.m. So instead of 2:30, it's going to start an hour and a half earlier at 1. And it's going to go for 3 hours, and pretty much to 4. So yeah, just for folks are aware, your other classes will have a different schedule too. I think your instructor from the other classes should have let you known, but if they didn't, you can always look this stuff up too. Cabrillo College final exam schedule. So let me look up the exam schedule. Here, right here, final examination schedule. So yeah, for us, we are a Monday, Wednesday, starting at 1:30. I mean 2:30. Yeah, so our class is right here, right? We're a Monday, Wednesday from inside 2:30, meaning our exam hour is scheduled for 1 p.m. Okay, on a Friday. Okay, hope that makes sense about the different schedule. Okay, so it's going to be a really short today. For folks who are on the recording, this recording will probably end in like 10-15 minutes. I'm just going to download the final, right, and then kind of go over the workflow of it. And I want folks to try it out themselves. So I'm not going to go over any of the solutions yet. I'll go over some possible solutions for the final on Wednesday. But yeah, it will be a good exercise to try it out yourself before seeing the solution. Okay, let me go ahead and download that final. Practice. There is a practice final somewhere here. Okay, here it is. Practice final. Okay. It's the same workflow as the midterm, meaning that there is a notebook. And the notebook is where we can type our code and test it. The questions will be in the Canvas itself, this take quiz. So let me click on this take quiz real quick. Okay, here it is, the quiz. There's 6 questions. Yeah, 6 questions. Let me go to the bottom. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So I'm just going to go over the workflow of this and let folks try it out themselves later. So I'm going to go ahead and download this exam here. This is the notebook where we can test our solutions. Let me download this. Oh wait, I think I already downloaded it from earlier. Let me delete it real quick. Okay, I just had to delete it. Okay, cool. So go ahead and download this. Okay, cool. I just downloaded it. Let me go ahead and upload it to my Jupyter server. So Jupyter server. Let me dedicate a new directory for this. Let's see. I'm going to dedicate a directory. I'll call it new folder. I'm going to dedicate it as practice final. There we go. Practice final exam. Okay, let me go ahead and upload it. Okay, there we go. Cool, uploaded. here it is, the playground. The questions are in the practice final. It's going to be the same exact workflow. We're pretty much going to, oh, make sure you run this first cell, by the way. This first cell will let our checker work. So pretty much same thing, right? We're just going to type out all of our functions in here and test locally first. So assuming you have it implemented, then you can test locally. And then if you're not sure what's going wrong with it, then there is a checker here. The checker isn't that verbose. It's very minimal. It won't really tell you whether or not it's fully correct. Right? It'll just test very minimally to test if it can work at a bare minimum. Okay, so here let me pull up the final exam practice. Okay, so practice final. Here we go. I'm gonna go through all of these questions, but not really do the solution for them. We'll go over possible solutions on Wednesday. But I want folks to, I want to reiterate that a lot of these questions on the final will be asking us to write loop algorithms. So I would probably review one of these old lessons on algorithms in specific. One of the biggest takeaways are writing algorithms that can represent a solution in a series of steps. So yeah, there's going to be lots of looping algorithms. Okay, let me go back to the practice final here. Practice final, okay. So the first question here is a looping algorithm. It says, write a function called listFilter, and all this function is going to do is filter a list. Right? So it's going to take a list as the first argument, and then a single number as the second argument. And the purpose of this function is to filter this original list. Right? Filter this list by grabbing only the values that are underneath this limit. So let me pretend that we were going to call this function, right, even though it's not made yet. So going to the exam, let me put the split screen real quick. Split screen. Okay. Let me zoom in a bit. Zoom out. Okay. So assuming that we have it implemented, I'm gonna pretend like we have it implemented and test it right away. This will help folks kind of understand the expected output for this function. So this function is called listFilter, right? So listFilter, okay. I'm attempting to invoke the function, right, which I didn't even write yet. But okay, this function takes two parameters. The first one is a list of floats, and then the next one is a single number. Right? This number will represent the threshold to filter based off of. So let me hard code in some arguments here. Right? Like let me just put in a list as the first argument. Let me put in some random floats in here, like let's go 6.9, 4.2, 10, 10.5. Let's go 1.4, and then 25. It doesn't matter. I'm just putting in some random floats here. Okay, that is the first argument right here. The second argument is a threshold. It's a number that represents how to filter the list. Meaning that if my second argument were something like 5, this is saying that the function should produce another list. It should produce another list that contains only numbers less than 5. So it should contain 4.2 and 1.4. Right, so let me just return this. Let me comment this. Right. this should return a list that looks like 4.2 and then 1.4. Okay. And let me just pretend to call this again, right? Like, oh, actually, let me print this. Like, the reason why I want to print this is because this is actually going to return a list that we should output. So let me print this whole output right here, right? Meaning that it should print that list. Okay, so that's kind of like a test case. Right? If we were to test it again with a different number, right? Like let me just copy and paste that same exact line. If I were to change this threshold value to something else, right? Like here, if I put 10 instead, right? This is saying we want to filter the list with a different limit. So this should print something else, right? It should print, well, the function should return 6.9 in the list, so 4.2, and 1.4. So it should print all of those, right? 6.9, 4.2, and then 1.4. Okay. So all we're really doing is invoking the function that we haven't implemented. This should help folks visualize how the function should work. This is a looping algorithm. In particular, it's a filtering algorithm. So I will take a look at the previous lesson about looping algorithms. Let me pull it up real quick. So I would pull up this previous lesson over here. Looping algorithms. All right. You might remember that we went through a few different ones, like the reduction algorithm. Right? But in particular, this question is asking for a filter algorithm, which is something that takes a sequence and produces another sequence based off some criteria. So I highly recommend looking at this old notebook. It's going to be very similar to this function over here. Right? This function is hard-coded to filter a list based off of the threshold 20. So it's going to be very similar. Okay, so yeah, that was the first question here. Let me go over the next ones. Okay. You know, I guess I could help folks get started on the definition real quick. So the definition of the function is defined as a list filter. Okay, and it takes two arguments, right? The first one, we're asking for it to be called number list. So I'll call it number list. And then the next one is the limit, right? A single number. Okay, as a bare minimum, we should have a docstring, which describes the purpose of the function and its inputs and outputs. The purpose here is to filter a list based off some threshold, right? the limit. Okay, the inputs and outputs, right? There are two inputs, right? Two arguments. Right? One is the number list. This is a list of floats, and then the next one is limit. Right? This is the criteria to filter based off of. Criteria to filter. The threshold criteria. Okay, and it's going to return one thing. Right? The point of this function is to return another list. Return a list. Returns the filtered list. Okay, there we go. That's a docstring. Let me fill in the body of this function real quick. So once again, a filtering algorithm, you can think of it as it starts off with an empty list. Right? So I went back to the old lesson on filtering. You can think of a filtering algorithm as start with an empty list, right, and then populate it, and then return it. Right, in this case, I'm just going to start with an empty list and return it. I'll let folks fill in the blanks later. So let me start with an empty list. Output is equal to an empty list, and you can do the to-do here. Right, to-do, populate that list. And let me just go ahead and return it. Return output. Careful for the indents, by the way. A lot of people, some folks might mess up the indents, which will mess up everything. So you can use a tab or 4 spaces. Welcome in, Terrace. Okay. So that's the just a skeleton. Okay, let me run this function. Okay, cool. I ran it, meaning that we should be able to test the functions now. So I'm going to press this play button here. There it is. Right, it's printing empty list. Once you finish the function, it should actually produce another list. Right, this function should return a list and print it. Okay, there is a checker down here. Once again, the checker is not very verbose. It's very minimal. Let me run it. It's just going to tell us whether or not our syntax is right and some other small feedback. Like right now, we did pass the doc string, but we failed some other test cases. Okay. Hopefully people are cool with this so far. Okay, so these are just test cases. Let me go ahead and comment these out. I'll let folks try it out later. Let me just highlight this and comment. There we go. Okay, let's move on to the next question, right, number 2. Okay, this one is a little different with the test cases. It's asking us to add up some numbers in a file. So this means we're going to have to create a file so the function can read it. Like let's say we were to call this function, right? So this will help us understand what's going on, right? Let's just say it's called file sums. Right? The goal of this function is to pass in some file name here. I'll let folks read this later, but most folks are on the recording, so you can just pause it and read this. So let's say we were to pass in some numbers here, right? Like let's say I had a file called something.txt, like let's just say we have a file called bignumbers.txt. Okay. Let me go ahead and create this file. So I'm going to go in the Explorer. Oh, I need to navigate to the directory with my exam, so it can read the same path. Let me go to the exam directory. Okay, here we go. Let me create a file called bignumbers.txt. Okay, let's just say we were to have 4 numbers in here. Right? That's the point of this question, right? To pretty much add 4 numbers in a file. So let me put in 4 random numbers here. Like let me put 50 point. I'm just gonna put 1. Yeah, 50.23. It doesn't really matter what numbers here. 400.10. And then 10. 100.01. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Let me go ahead and save this. So Control S, saved. Okay. Let me split screen this again. So if we were to call this function, right, with this argument, it should tell us whether or not the sum is greater than 100. Right, that's the point of this function right here. Right, so this should return true. Right, it should return true because the sum of these 4 numbers are greater than 100. Okay, so this should return true. Return true. But I'm going to print it. Right, so I'm going to print it because I don't want to rely on it being the last statement for Jupyter to print it. Don't print it. This should print true. All right, should print true. Okay. Let's say we were to have another file, like let's say we had another file called a small numbers.txt. So small numbers.txt. Let me go ahead and make this file. So let me go here, new file, call it small numbers.txt. Let me populate it with some small numbers, like 1.4, 3, and 2.0, and let's go like 8.5. Doesn't matter. Just 4 small numbers. If we were to invoke the function with this file, it should return false because the sum of all these numbers are less than 100. Right? You see in the question it says it should return true, the sum is greater than 100, or otherwise false. So let me just print this. Print file sums. Right, this should print false. I hope they make sense. We did a very similar exercise on this a while ago. You might want to take a look at the file input-output lab. So let me go back to a previous lab. Let's see. Files, lab 13. We did this a while ago, down here somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, down here on lab 13, there was a function which opens a file and sums up all the numbers in the first 4 lines. And it's just going to return the result. So yeah, the function is going to be very similar to this lab exercise. The only difference is it's going to return a Boolean. Right? This one didn't really return a Boolean. It just returned the sum. So yeah, it's going to be very similar. Right? But back to the exam, right? This should return whether or not the sum exceeds 100. Okay. People cool with this so far? All right, let me help folks get started with this function. So I'm going to set up a minimal skeleton for this file sums. So in the solution cell up here, oh, I forgot to put my name. Okay, in the solution cell here, right, there's a function that should be called file sums. So define a function called file sums. Okay. And let's see, file sums. And then the argument here, there's only one of them. Right? The only argument is a file name. So let me put it here. A file name. All right. Let me put a doc string in here, the bare minimal requirement. I'm just going to do this purpose. Once again, please be careful for its indents. Some folks mess up their indents here. Right? It's either 4 spaces or a tab. Okay, so the purpose here is returns whether or not the sum of 4 first 4 lines exceeds 100. Okay. So that's the purpose of this function. Let me describe its inputs and outputs. So the input here, there's only one argument. It's a file name. or more specifically, the path to the file. Okay, there's one return statement, one output, I mean. I should, let me fix these indents real quick. Okay. It just returns a Boolean, or it returns true if the sum is greater than 100, right? Else false. Okay, let me fill in the body of this function to always return true for now. So let me go ahead and return, actually, I'm gonna return false. It's gonna hard code it. Okay, so the to-do here, the to-do is, no, read the file, sum up the first 4 numbers. And then you're gonna wanna branch based off that sum. Right, so branch based off the sum. Right, a branch means that there's going to be a couple cases. Like if the sum is greater than 100, then do something, right? Else do something else. All right, so let me load this function in. Let me press the play button. Okay, there we go. We ran it, and let me test it. It should print false, false, right? Because we hard coded it to only return false. Okay, let me check it down here. The checker is not that verbose, but it'll tell us. Right? It says, oh, we passed the docstring, right? We passed the syntax, but we failed some test cases. Right? This makes sense why we failed some test cases. It makes sense because we hard coded it to only return false. Okay. Hope this makes sense so far. Well, let's see. On the exam, if folks are having trouble with a single function, like sometimes it's possible for one function to fail and make the next ones fail. I think this will happen if the syntax is off, right? Like I think some people might mess up on this on the indents here. Like if I put no indents here, let me just mess up the indents on purpose. Okay, so I just messed up the indents on purpose, meaning that these don't really belong in the function anymore. If I were to run this, right, it's gonna have an error here. Hopefully folks can kind of debug these sorts of errors, but if you're not able to, right, it's okay to comment out the whole function and just submit it as is. Right, so you can comment it with, I'm just commenting this whole block right here. Right? The way it did that is by highlighting it and pressing Control //. Right? Control // is just a keyboard shortcut to comment out things. So yeah, if you're having trouble debugging, you can just comment it out and submit it for partial credit. Right? The reason why I commented it out is so we can carry on. Right? See, I just pressed play and there's no more error. This will help me carry on with these tests over here. Okay, so I hope that makes sense so far. Let me fix this, re-indent everything. There we go. All right, let's move on to the next ones. Okay, let's see, any questions so far? We only went through the workflow on the first 2 questions on the practice. Okay, cool. Let's see, a couple more to go. Okay, question number 3. This one is asking us to write a function that produces an HTML tag. And in particular, this tag represents a link, something that's clickable. Okay, so let me pretend to call it. It's got two parameters. The first parameter is the plain text to show, and then the next one is the URL, right? The address of where that text should bring us to. I think we did a very similar one question in the practice midterm. So you might want to look at the practice midterm. I think this is the exact same one. Okay, so let's pretend to call it. I'm going to comment this out over here. Let's pretend to call it even though we didn't implement it. Right, the name of the function is link target. Okay, it takes two arguments. Right, the first one is some plain text. I'm going to hard code something like maybe let's just say I'm trying to make a link to our course home, our Canvas homepage. So let me say a course home, and this should link to our Canvas. Right? I think our Canvas URL is right here. So I'm just going to paste that here. Right, this is the URL for the Canvas. Let me just make sure. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, it brought us to the home page. Yeah, so this function should build an HTML string. Right, that's what it's saying. It needs to build an HTML string that uses these two arguments in some sort of tag. So you might want to look at a previous one. Let's see. We could look at the HTML lesson. So let me see. HTML lesson. There is a section here on hyperlinks. Right, this is pretty much what we want to do. Right, we want to build some string, right, where the text is between the tags and the URL is inside of this opening tag. Okay, I think we did this in a previous assignment. Practice midterm. Let me just double check. Practice midterm. Oh, no, we didn't. We didn't do this one, but we did some similar ones. Okay. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. So if we were to print it, right, so let me just put that whole thing in a print function. This should print the HTML tag that represents a hyperlink. A hyperlink to our homepage. Okay. I'll help folks get started on this real quick. So let me go ahead and define this function called link target. Okay, so go up here. This is the solution cell. I'm going to define a function called link target. Let me bring these side by side real quick. Okay, final. Okay. So link target is a function that takes two arguments. Right? The first one is called text. Next one is URL. Okay, let me do a docstring. This generates an HTML string that represents a hyperlink. Okay. There's two arguments, right? Two inputs. The first one is text, which is the text to show, and then the next one is URL, right? Which is the address to link to. Okay. So let me create a, oh, and then it's also returning, right? There's one output. It's just going to return a string. It returns an HTML string, actually. Oh, hold up. Give me 1 second. I'm getting interrupted by, I think, a field trip. Hello. Oh, looks like there's a field trip on campus. Nice, nice. Yeah, we've got a bunch of people peeking in. Welcome, welcome. Okay. Let me return a dummy string just to help folks get started on this. All right, so I'm going to create a string called myHTML. I'm just going to set it to something blank for now, and then just return it. Return myHTML. Okay, there we go. So all this function does is return a blank string. Let me define this function. Okay, cool. I just pressed the play button, meaning that this function is loaded in to the kernel. And let me test it now. Okay, so let me press play here. Right, it's printing. Oh, it says link target is not defined. So this is a possible error that we might see. Most likely there was some spelling mistake. Let me check the definition of the function. Yeah, there's just a little spelling mistake here. I put an underscore here when I meant to not have that. Okay, so delete that, and let me reload this function. So Control Enter, there we go, just loaded it back in. Let me rerun this cell. Okay, cool. There we go. So I'm testing out the link target function. It's printing nothing, right? Because it's just printing an empty string. A link target, no matter what we give it, it's just going to return an empty string. So the goal here is to create a hyperlink reference. You might want to look at the previous lesson for that. So let me pull up the previous lesson again. And I want to go to the HTML lesson, number 9, and look at the hyperlink part. So let's see, hyperlink somewhere here. There we go, right? You pretty much want to create a string that returns this right here, right? This part that I highlighted, it represents a link to a hyperlink thing. Okay. Cool, hope that makes sense so far. Let me comment this out. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Let me move on to the next questions. Okay. This one's a little different. This function is asking us to pretty much take in a dictionary and print out some values from that dictionary. So let me just fix these up real quick. This might be a little hard to read, but this first code block is kind of just giving us an example of what the dictionary will look like. If we were to pass this dictionary into the function here, right, the function here is called print contact info. If we were to pass this function into that, this dictionary into this function, it should output these lines over here. Right, so all this function is really doing is taking a dictionary and accessing its values, right? Accessing its values and then printing it out. So here, let me do an example real quick. Let me pretend to call it. Right, so the function here is called a print contact info. Okay, it takes one argument. The argument here is just a dictionary. And here I'm gonna hard code a dictionary here. Or actually, you know what? Let me hard code a dictionary outside of this function, so I can give it a name. Right? Like let me create a test dictionary, and then set it equal to some hard coded values. Right? In this case, the question is assuming that the dictionary will have 3 key value pairs. Right? Got the name, address, and phone. meaning that let me put in a name here. So this is this dictionary. Let me just put some random name, like your name here. Right, your name here. You can test this later. And then don't forget this comma. And then another key value pair, address. I'm going to hard code another string. 1, 2, 3, 4, Park Place. And then let me hard code another key value pair, the phone number. I'll represent this as a string. 4, 5, 6. Okay. Here's some sample data. So I just created a dictionary. If we were to pass this dictionary into this function, so test dict right here, right, all this function should do is dump out data. So there's no need to wrap this in a print statement. The print statement should already be in here. Pretty much, it just needs to access the values and print it in this certain format. All right. So yeah, hopefully people are cool with this. All right. Now I'm going to comment this out. Any questions so far? Okay. Cool. Okay, finally, this last question in the sample exam is asking us to create a class called counter. We actually already did this last week. So you might want to look at the lab from last week. Pretty much last week we did this lab over here. Let me pull it up. Very last lab, number 20. Yeah. And we wrote a class called counter, which pretty much is just like a tally. Right? Like I brought this picture up earlier. Counter tally. We implemented a class which pretty much wraps an integer that represents something like this right here. Right? We represented a class that has the ability to increment and decrement. So you might want to take a look at this previous lab. Okay, let me bring up this over here. This class is asking us to implement 4 functions. We did most of these already, so you can probably get those done. We got the constructor. This is the overloaded constructor, by the way. Overloaded meaning that it takes an additional argument. And then a couple other member functions, like the ability to decrement, the ability to increment, and a reset function. Right? So some counters have a button that resets it back to 0. Okay. So this is a class that will have 4 functions attached to it. So you're gonna have to code it up here, right? In this solution cell, right? You're gonna have to create a class called counter, right? And then fill in the member functions here. So let me just go to do. I'll leave this as a folks to do it later. To do. Okay, so this is a class that does nothing. Let me load it into the kernel. Okay, I just ran it. So yeah, you're gonna have to look at last week's stuff, last week's material over here. No, not here. My bad. Lab 20. And then we tested it a bunch, right? So we wrote the class here, and then tested it a bunch over here. So yeah, that's pretty much the class counter. Okay, that's about it for the exam. We just went over a practice final. The actual final will be very similar. I do want to reiterate looping algorithms. It would be a good idea to practice writing loops. So make sure you fully understand all of the material from here. Let's see. For loops, while loops, algorithms. These are all pretty important stuff. Yeah. Oh, these three over here. And make sure you're familiar with the lab as well. Okay. I hope that gives folks a good head start. If you need a more practice on this, especially for folks who are already comfortable with this, you can look up more practice. Right? Like you can Google up stuff like Python function practice. So Python function practice, there's a bunch of exercises you can do. Let me click on this first one. Let's see, it looks like some exercises. It's pretty much, they're like exam style questions. Right? The first one, say, hey, write a Python function to find the maximum of 3 numbers. So you could practice this. There is a sample solution here that you can click to see it. And then the next one, this is a very exam style question as well. Right, write a Python function to sum up all the numbers in the list. Okay. So yeah, I would take a look at more practice if you need. In particular, if you end up on this website, the first 10 are probably sufficient. Right? So you would really only have to go through the first 10 here. There's no need to go past this. This is more advanced stuff. Okay. So yeah, I would practice all of these. These are pretty much mostly looping algorithms. All right. That's it for the practice final. Yeah, so let's spend the remaining time just catching up on anything that folks might need help with. So I'm gonna stop the recording here and walk around the classroom, help out folks on any previous material. And yeah, if you're on the Zoom, feel free to stick around too. I'd be happy to help folks out. Okay, other than that, thank you all. We'll go over possible solutions for this next time. But yeah, please try it out yourself. It'll exercise the problem solving methodology. All right, thank you everyone. You'll have a great day.